The Premier League title race remains impossible to call after a 1-0 draw at Anfield. But let's dig deeper into the tactics we saw on display from Arteta and Klopp, beginning with Liverpool in possession. When Liverpool were looking to build up initially, we saw Arsenal press in a 4-4-2, with Jesus ready to press Van Dijk whilst he was supported by Havertz, leaving Odegaard and Rice in the midfield. Arsenal were happy to let Alisson have the ball, but without options to pass to, in this 4-4-2 high block, and this would often lead to Liverpool being forced longer. The one drawback for Arsenal, of course, is that there would be 2 versus 3 down in the midfield. So in these scenarios, we would often see Endo being the deepest man, often drawing Odegaard, and Szoboszlai would drop alongside him to try and be the secondary outlet. If the press was timed perfectly, with the Liverpool pivots not having the time to turn and find the man, Arsenal had the potential to win the ball. However, Jones was the free third man, and if he drifted in behind the midfield 2, or this wider zone, there was the potential for him to be found between the lines, allowing Liverpool to then move past the press. So we soon saw an early in-game adaptation from Arteta. He still wanted his 4-4-2, but with the ability to protect the midfield. So instead of Havertz pressing alongside Jesus, he dropped deeper into his more natural midfield role, and instead it was Martinelli who would come in from the left-hand side to pick up Konate, still keeping Arsenal's 4-4-2 and trying to shepherd the ball away from the right-hand side where Liverpool potentially had an advantage. But in general deeper play, we did see Arsenal revert to more of a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1 in the defensive phase initially, with Jesus being the sole presser. This more passive shape may have been because Arsenal went ahead so early, so they were happy to have more numbers behind the ball in order to maintain that solidity. But we saw Liverpool looking to break Arsenal's compact shape, and one way they did this was down the left-hand side, as Tsimikas was highly aggressive, moving high up on the left-hand side so that Diaz and Gakpo at times operated as a double false 9, with each having the freedom to move around in this zone. Saka's work rate was used to the max by Arteta, as often, no matter how high up Tsimikas pushed, Arteta looked for Saka to drop deeper, almost into a 5, in order to prevent the Gunners being overloaded in this final line. And this naturally created a large gap in the left-back zone that Jones often looked to drop into to initially pick up the ball. Jones could then potentially draw a midfielder across, creating more space in this region, or just have the room to push higher up the pitch and look to pick out the pass, having a little bit more time on the ball. But when Jesus was the sole man in the defensive phase, we saw Van Dijk being highly aggressive, looking to push up into this left-hand space, allowing Jones to remain higher, so that now there was a much more exaggerated left-hand side overload that the Reds could look to take advantage of. And we did see a lot of opposing movements from the Liverpool forwards, looking to create space for runners in behind. Alternatively, what this would do is then drag the rest of the Arsenal side across as they look to compensate for these situations. And down the right-hand side, Salah looked to hold his width, so we saw Van Dijk looking for this direct switch time and again, even if Zinchenko looked in a good position to defend, as Salah's physicality meant that he could hold off the Ukrainian aerially. And he did look shaky at times in the 1 versus 1 situations. So to stop the left-hand side overload at its source, Arsenal once again went back to the 4-4-2, but this time it couldn't be Martinelli pushing up alongside Van Dijk because, as we've discussed, Liverpool were already looking for the switch to the right-hand side. So instead, it was either Havertz or Odegaard who would push up alongside Jesus, so that now Van Dijk couldn't push aggressively into the left-hand zone. So to counter this 2 versus 2, Liverpool needed a 3. And initially, we did see Trent occupying more traditional right-back zones, and it was either up to Endo, with Szoboszlai and Jones providing the midfield options, or Trent could still invert alongside Szoboszlai. However, in these situations, he wouldn't have as much time on the ball in the compact midfield. This wasn't ideal because then he couldn't use his passing range, whilst Endo was much more adept at just keeping the ball ticking over rather than changing the game. So soon, Klopp inverted the roles of these two players, and we saw Trent inverting much earlier. If Arsenal stuck with the front 2, there was still the potential for a midfield overload, often with Jones still picking up the ball in that left-hand zone. So instead, we would either see both forwards sit off deeper or more of that 4-2-3-1/4-3-3 in order to prevent the pivots getting onto it easily. However, as we saw, even with a little bit of space, Trent is able to change the game, and with time and space afforded, he was able to find the assist into Salah with his long-range passing. But aside from a few moments of brilliance, Liverpool's attack actually wasn't the most functional in this game, mainly depending on Salah and Trent's magic, as well as turnovers in the transitional phase. But what were the Gunners up to in possession? Going up early may have changed Arsenal's plans, as they were a bit more passive in possession than usual. With Raya on the ball, the centre-backs would split either side of him. And as we've seen, Liverpool can be quite aggressive in their press, with Gakpo and Salah ready to press the centre-backs, whilst Trent has the permission to push up high onto the left-back to prevent that being an outlet option. This can be somewhat of a risk, as it places a lot of responsibility on Konate to cover this right-back zone in this defensive phase, and this was something that Arsenal looked to test, as what we often saw was Havertz and Martinelli both looking to operate in this wider zone, and Raya time and again would look to go long to find Havertz, who could then knock down the ball to Martinelli, and all of a sudden, Arsenal would have bypassed Liverpool's aggressive press, which was effective today, if Havertz and Martinelli were able to hold on to the ball. What was interesting is that for the most part in this match, Zinchenko was not inverting super early in the build-up phase, probably due to the danger of Salah attacking this left-back space if there was a turnover. So in the initial phases, he operated much more as a traditional left-back, with Rice and Odegaard being the double pivot instead, whilst Havertz pushed higher up, meaning that if Salah was caught higher up the pitch, there was potential for a left-hand side overload. So there was a lot of responsibility placed on Szoboszlai and Endo to be able to shift across and cover, which they did do quite effectively. But in the deeper build-up phases, we did see Ben White occupying his more central position to begin with at times. And what this would do is draw Diaz higher up the pitch towards him, opening up the passing lane to Saka, who has an incredible way of receiving and opening up the pitch for himself instantly, meaning that he could then cut in, looking to score or create for others. And early on, Tsimikas was struggling with this dynamic. And in fact, his injury and the arrival of Joe Gomez may have been somewhat of a defensive blessing in disguise, as Joe Gomez is much better defensively, and add to that, he is right-footed. So when Saka looked to cut in, he was coming onto Gomez's stronger foot, and as a result, Liverpool actually looked more solid with Gomez. And if Arsenal were much slower in their build-up, when White looked to push higher up the pitch, Diaz could track. However, when Arsenal increased the tempo, Saka and White looked to create 2-versus-1 situations to find White on the overlap for the cross. However, the pass was often overhit, or White was not found at the appropriate time. And in the attack, Arsenal also didn't look at their best. Overall, Arsenal will be much happier with the point, and the title race still looks on course to be the most predictable in years. For the manager tactical scores, neither side was at their best, though Liverpool were slightly more proactive, meaning Klopp gets a 5.5 and Arteta a 5. It was interesting how both Klopp and Arteta used variations of the 4-4-2 in the defensive phase. If you want a full breakdown of the strengths and weaknesses of the 4-4-2, click on screen now.